Hey, welcome back to another episode of the Lonely Liberal Podcast. I'm your host, Nick Zankin, and I'm so happy to have you on this lovely Wednesday evening. We got a great show for you today. We're going to be talking about if Trump can really nationalize the elections, particularly the midterms coming up, the 2026 midterms, which, by the way, are turning out to be maybe the most important midterm election in definitely recent history, but probably in the last 100 years. So makes everyone's skin crawl, right, when you hear that could happen. And even though a lot of the Senate Republicans, congressional Republicans have said, oh, no, we're not going to do that, stop. And he probably can't, let's be honest. It's still worth talking about because it's coming from the freaking president. So we got a lot to talk about today. So without further ado, let's get to it. All right, so what are we talking about here? So yesterday, February 3rd, Trump was on the Dan Bongino podcast. And for those who don't know who Dan Bongino is, you're probably not in the right-wing conservative podcast world. But so, yeah, he has a show like that, a very conservative show. And actually, last year, he was appointed as kind of the assistant head of the FBI, so kind of Kash Patel's right-hand man. Kash Patel, also a podcaster, so the podcaster to FBI pipeline was very real in Trump too. So Bongino, though, since then has resigned. So he's no longer involved with the FBI. He said it was a lot of work. I mean, hey, I don't blame him. I would much rather host a podcast than be the second in command in the FBI. And yeah, so I am no judgment on that one. But he's done. He's back on this pod. And so, like I was saying, Trump got on the pod yesterday, which always is weird when the president's on a podcast, but hey, fair enough. And while on the show talked about how he wants to nationalize elections. And the specific wording was to take over voting in at least 15 places. And obviously not being specific with the 15 places. And that sounded like, he was rambling about, there's all these non-citizens voting, there's all this mail-in ballot problems and all this stuff, and that was kind of his ramble. But, it's a podcast, what are you going to do? But then this morning, when he was asked about it by a reporter, he said, no, I'm not joking. I think that should happen, yada, 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 2020, blah, blah, blah. And the phrasing nationalizing voting, I mean, it's a little jargony, but honestly, it'll probably be what you read about and what the title of this podcast will be. What that basically means is I want the federal government to control the machinery that decides who wins, right? That's what that means. That's the practical definition of the phrase nationalize voting, okay? So I think it's important to understand what actually happens, what's the status quo, because obviously after the 2020 and Trump's whole election stolen narrative stuff, things got more in front and center about mail-in ballots and all that stuff. But even back then, with Al Gore and Bush and all the drama with the voting machines. So for those who don't know, the way the U.S. runs elections is there's around 10,000 local election jurisdictions. And this is the little groups of area that kind of control elections. These are run by polling places, they're called. And there's over 110,000 of them throughout the country. So many. And then 10,000 early voting locations on top of it all, right? And then in that system, there's almost 1 million poll workers. There's over 915,000 in the last election alone, right? And the way these are operated and run is that each state basically has its own guidelines. There are chief election officials and they appoint different people, but almost always it's kind of administered at the county level. I mean, think about when you voted, right? You go to your county office, you do your thing. So this isn't the same in any two states. They're all slightly different, but effectively there's a huge web of county level employees that are kind of trickled down through the state who manage this pretty complicated process. And like I said, hundreds of thousands of poll workers. So even if you wanted to nationalize elections, you're talking about replacing a system run by thousands of jurisdictions, roughly 1 million poll workers, and then switching that with something federal. So that isn't a tweak, right? It's impossible to call that a tweak. It's a takeover, right? The word takeover, again, really rings true, right? And obviously, this is illegal. And specifically, the Constitution is very clear that this isn't a thing, right? There's something called the Elections Clause, and it basically says that states are the ones in charge of the time, place, and manner of congressional elections. Now, Congress can alter the law around this, but it's, again, a Congress thing, not a president thing. It's a state plus Congress kind of thing. Now, obviously, as we know, Mr. Donald J. Trump doesn't seem to particularly care about the Constitution that much. I mean, my God, he's talking about running potentially for a third term. Even today, he's talking about it. So he, he has a very loose interpretation of how the Constitution applies to him. And unfortunately, by proxy, so does the Republican Congress. Now, we've heard, the Senate Majority Leader, Toon, right, say, oh, no, we're not going to do that. Mike Johnson, the House, no. So it's highly unlikely this is going to happen from Congress. But again, I think it is important to understand, it's a part of a larger theme of Trump just really having such little respect for the Constitution and really at his whims kind of saying I don't like it, and then coming up with some story about elections and stats and stuff like that. And basically his goon squad around him kind of reverberating that through the necessary channels, whether it's Fox or the random Congress people or something like that. They'll say, oh, no, we're not considering it, but I understand the president's concern about blah, 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 blah. So, yeah. And again, if I'm not making it clear here, I just want to make sure that it's clear. This is not a thing. You can't do this, right? Because, like I said, it's as clear as day a Constitution thing. Now, what is a real risk, and the reason why I'm doing a podcast about this, right? The reason why we're listening, right? Is that it kind of creates this indirect coercion, right? Which is part of this larger story that we're already seeing with the midterms, right? And I'm not just talking about the gerrymandering mid-decade that you're seeing in Texas or California or whatever state you want to choose, and him kind of saying to Texas, find me state, find me more seats, yada, yada, stuff like that. I'm talking about the talk about mail-in ballots. I'm talking about the early registration, the bring the licenses to the polls, stuff like this. That narrative is starting to become very, very real. And we already know how he handles election defeats. Cough, cough, 2020, it's stolen, blah, blah, blah. To this day, I mean, we talked about it on the show Sunday, but they're now using the FBI to investigate the Georgia votes from 2020. Tulsi Gabbard's in there doing a photo op. I mean, they are really, really trying their hardest to make people question the sanctity of our elections, right? Like I just said, they're freaking in Georgia this week seizing boxes to try to prop this narrative. And the reason why this is so scary is because it's just rocket fuel on the feds are taking over elections. We can't trust the states. We can't trust Democratic states because obviously the Democratic states are often where Democrats win, right? And so this normalizes this idea that local officials are illegitimate and only Trump is the real honest person. And it's so bad because if any other person did it, and we have a large conservative audience. Hey, what's going on? Nice to have you. And I know some of you are going to say, oh, blah, 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 blah. But imagine any other president like Biden or Obama or anyone you don't like off the jump saying this exact same stuff. You'd be freaking out if Obama said, we're going to take control on a federal level of elections and only my people will count the votes. So golden rule, folks, right? So no good. And I wanted to do a little deeper dive on this kind of non-citizen voting claim, right? Because this, at the core of it, is where the folks like Steve Bannon and through Trump and Miller and all these guys kind of really hang their hat on, because it plays into this illegal immigrant stuff that has become such a national issue and now a real big drama with ICE in Minnesota and whatnot. So is there any truth that, millions of people are voting illegally, and it's this whole thing. I mean, we had Steve Bannon on today saying he's going to have ICE at all the polls and stuff like that. That's just terrifying. That's just going to make less people vote, but whatever. Is that really a problem? And time again, no studies show that non-citizens are in abundance voting in federal elections. It's illegal, right? It's illegal. It's illegal for non-citizens to vote in U.S. elections. That's already the law, okay? So this idea that that's like something that is happening is really, really not true. And to talk about this momentum that I was telling you about, there's this thing happening right now in Congress called the SAVE Act, right? Which basically is something that says you need to show your proof of citizenship to be able to register for vote, right? It's effectively like a show your papers requirements. And the reason, I know people listening are saying, well, why is it so bad to force people to prove that they're Americans? If you're Nick, you're telling the truth and, there really isn't a problem, then what's the holdup? And the holdup isn't the fact that there's so many illegal immigrants voting. It's that people are horrible with admin. And I'm not talking about undocumented immigrants. I'm talking about American citizens. Administrative burden makes people do everything less. I mean, you must know, like thinking about yourself, the more paperwork, the more documents, the more files you need to do, the less people will actually vote. I mean, my God, a third of the country already doesn't vote, and this isn't a thing. Isn't it more democratic if more people vote? This is what we're talking about. It's not about, and you can go, oh, well, we had to, but it's not a problem. There's nothing proving that it's a problem. It's not, it's an unnecessary administrative burden on people that's addressing a problem that hasn't been shown to exist, right? So it's not an argument about should illegal immigrants vote or should they not? Should non-citizens vote or should they not? It's about, should you impose this kind of broad documentation rule that can knock potentially eligible voters off the rolls, right? And all of this matters, not just for the sanctity of democracy and the American way of blah, blah, blah. It matters because the 2016 midterms could not be more important. I mean, not only for the sake of this country, which I truly think needs, a democratic showing because this has just gone so poorly this last year, but because we've already seen over this last year his ability to feel no remorse flaunting the constitutional rules, whether it's illegal executive orders or sending the National Guard illegally and then having to pull them out, fake rulings, fake this, and look at the chaos that it's causing. So the idea that he's already floating this idea of these takeover regions and thinking of jurisdictions, that should freak you out because that's what authoritarians do, frankly. And so you may have this kind of happening on one side, the save stuff on the other side, and then the biggest one is what's happening in Fulton County, which is the Atlanta, Georgia one, is what's the most scary. Because we heard, you can Google it, like the transcript of him saying to the Georgia governor, find me more votes. He has no problem rigging these elections when he doesn't get the results because we've heard him say it. What does find me 10,000 votes mean? What does that mean, right? What does that actually mean? If I told you, find me 10,000 votes, does that mean I want you to be honest and fair, or do you want me to cheat, right? So this is already kind of a bad precedent and something that people, unfortunately, have frankly had a blind eye on. So yeah, we'll see. That's no good. So that and the staffing and all this stuff, it's terrifying. So the truth of it all, and kind of in closing how I feel, right? I hate to be blunt, but this is what authoritarianism sounds like in American English. We should take over the voting. And that's our show, folks. Thank you so much for listening today. If you like the show, please give it a 5-star review wherever you listen. People on Apple Podcasts, help me out. A lot of our listeners listen there. Don't do it, please. Really appreciate it. And YouTube, like, subscribe. I'm starting to make little clips on YouTube. We're building a YouTube community. I love the comments. I love the emails. Please email me at thelonelyliberalpodcast@gmail.com. I really appreciate that. And yeah, what do you think? I mean, obviously, with all this Trump stuff, it could be one crazy thing and then it's nothing. But as we've seen over this term, these crazy things materialize more often than we would hope they would. So yeah. What a time to be alive. We'll be back on Sunday. And till then, keep it together. We'll be fine. All right. See ya. Bye.